Okay, so the high poly stage. Now this is the fun part. What we're going to be doing is effectively adding as much detail as we can to the mesh. We're purely thinking about aesthetics. Optimization comes later in the form of the low poly stage. So as you can see, I've gone ahead a bit and edited the mesh in a few areas. For example, the trigger guard. It's a lot smaller than it used to be because it used to be clipping into both of the index first two fingers. So now it's a lot more reasonably sized. I won't be showing or going over the whole part of this process because it does take a few hours, and I don't think you want to sit there and watch me do absolutely everything. Aramis 3D is a good YouTube channel. I'll see if I can remember to link him in the description, because he goes over hard surface everything basically, and a very good learning resource. I'm basically going to be glossing over most of this in the interest of time and getting to the actual modding stuff. Okay, so what I like to do when I start the high poly is create a high poly material. We'll just call it high poly. And the key part is adding some specular and glossiness. So it creates a sharp highlight, and then when we apply it to the mesh, that gives us more feedback on what we call the specular highlight, which is that highlight you can see on the edge of the mesh. What I've done here is, so subdivision is, in 3ds Max at least, when you add this turbo smooth modifier, what that does is it takes an unsmooth mesh and adds faces iteratively. So each iteration smooths out and basically adds, for each face it adds 4 faces within that face. So the more iterations, effectively the more smooth it is, technically. So what I've done is, I've created this other example mesh to show what I mean by specular highlights. So for this mesh, I've put the control loops, which are these edges which are close to the edge to control the smoothing, quite tight, whereas on this mesh they're further out, which means when the mesh is subdivided it smooths out over more of an area, if that makes sense. So the key difference here is beginners often go for more of this type of smoothing, where they look at their reference and they think, these edges are really sharp, I should probably make mine very sharp. But the trap there is, in a game engine, when you're viewing the asset from quite far away, it might be hard to see with the encoding of the video. But the one on the right with the tighter edges is completely, there's no response here. You can't see any specular highlight at all. It's just completely sharpened, what we call aliased. It's just a few pixels. Whereas on the left one, you can still see a bit of a response. You can still tell that the edges are somewhat smooth. So, long story short, in game engines, we want to aim to do this more than this. We want, especially for meshes that are more small, we want to ensure that the edges are smooth enough so that when you view them in game with the camera, and it's however distance away, you can still tell that the mesh is somewhat smooth. And that's another key part, is you need to keep rotating around the model, checking all the angles, and zooming out to roughly, if we place it roughly where it would be on screen in the game, then you can tell that it should be a certain level of smoothness. Right, so there is one other technique other than subdivision which I use to create the high poly, and that's Booleans. So Booleans are really quite powerful. Let's take a look at this cylinder. They basically allow you to have shapes interact with each other. For example, this big cylinder can have 5 smaller cylinders basically punch through it, a subtraction operation. You can have obviously other kinds of operations like union and intersection, and they all do different things to sort of create this one mesh out of essentially primitives. So if I just hide this, I'll show you how I made it from scratch. So we'll create I keep forgetting front is back. We'll create a cylinder, just real rough, maybe align it to this. And let's take the height. Oh, that's interesting. Roughly to where we need it to be. Yeah, and then let's increase the radius a bit. So this is important. The number of sides. So I'm using 200 here. You kind of need this because what we're going to do later on in Zbrush is to polish the edge out, and you don't want too much faceting, which is the edges. The curve is essentially made up of straight faces, and too much faceting means you'll get these sort of weird hard lines on the edge of the mesh. So I want to convert my face selection into an edge selection. I hold Control and click Edge, and then I'm going to chamfer it. So with the chamfer, if you use a tri-chamfer, there's a sort of weird limit to it, as you can see. What we instead want to do is use quad chamfer, which allows us to set any distance really will work, just even insane distances like this. Wow, what is that? We'll go to here, and apply this, and then just get rid of this extra edge that appears. Right, now we can start punching some holes in this thing. So I'm going to again go to front view or back, I really can't remember. We'll create a cylinder here, another cylinder. Now this one, because it's smaller, it doesn't have to be as many sides. We can maybe go for something safer like 100, just purely for performance reasons, so it'll load better. We're going to align it so it's perfectly in the center, and then what we're going to do is we're going to apply an edit poly, element select it, and move it roughly into position where we think the cylinder is going to be. And now what we do is we array it. So we know that the hunting revolver has 5 shots, so we're going to go with 4 additional shapes, and then we're going to go for rotate around the Z axis. And as you can see, as we increase, okay, yeah, we want 5. As we increase the angle, it basically rotates it around in an even shape, and this can work. Whoops. This can work with position as well. So say if we, yeah, there we go. So yeah, position arrays, rotation arrays, they all work the same way. The reason why it's not just rotating around is because this object's pivot is in the center of this larger cylinder. So if we rotate this around, and then I guess where it actually needs to be, yeah, 72. Now we chose instance instead of copy, so that all of these cylinders now are all instanced. So these are 4 instances of, well, these are all identical. So what we can do here is we can changing one changes the others basically, and we'll keep going until it punches out the other side. And now, because the bullets have a sort of lip at the base, we need to create one more shape, which is another cylinder. We're going to copy this time. Right click the spinner back to 0, and then just sort of punch it slightly into the shape, and then expand it outwards, and then we'll maybe give it a different color just so we don't confuse ourselves. Another technique you can do, if you know the angle value, you can just right click the angle snap up here and just go to 72 degrees, hit E, and then hold shift and just rotate it 4 times instanced, and then that gives us the same result. Always good to make sure you don't copy too many. Alright, now we turn this purple shape into a pro Boolean. So we go to compound objects, pro Boolean, and then we start picking, and we've got subtraction on, and we literally just click each shape that we want to do. And there we go. We have the rough cylinder shape done on edge faces here, just so we can see a bit clearer. So the power of the instancing here is we can actually take, I didn't name these, this is so much more confusing, any of these, and if we change one, it changes the other. Bit laggy, but you can see that it's actually happening. Another strength, I think what I'm going to do is I'll undo it. And what I'll do is I'll rename these green ones, yep, with the rename objects tool. I'll call them, I don't know, small indent sub numbered. So then each one of these are called small indent, and then I'll take the larger ones here, rename these to bullet sub or something. Then, if I element select and move the object in, this is another thing you can do, which allows you to set the spacing of the holes and obviously the size. You'll have to reposition the others again, but yeah. So we have our cylinder, now we want to polish it. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit, I used a shortcut there, but if I go to File, Export, Selected, and we're just going to hit G here, and I already saved one earlier, but just save it as something like, you know, mesh.obj. Make sure this is triangles, because Zbrush likes triangles and not quads. And then we open Zbrush. So Zbrush, bit of a weird program. It started out as a 2.5D painting program kind of thing, if I recall correctly. So yeah, it's a bit odd, bit of a steep learning curve, so just follow my instructions closely. So what we'll do is we'll go up here to import, and we're going to import the OBJ, which we just exported. Click and drag it out into the canvas, and then hit T, or just click up here on the edit button, and then we can rotate it around. So this program is built for styluses, you know, like a tablet. So clicking the open space is for rotating, and then if you hold Alt, click, let go of Alt, and drag, then you can zoom. I know it's weird. Yeah, if we hit P, or click here for perspective, you can get a better view in the scale of the cylinder. So yeah, what we'll do now is we want to, if I hit Shift F, we want to increase the amount of faces so that it smooths more cleanly. So what I've done is I've installed the Dynamesh master script. You can Google it. For some reason it's not included in Zbrush by default. I don't know why that is, but yeah. We basically set how many polygons we want. So I'm going to go for 2 here, because if you have a shape which has been punched through, that increases the surface area of the shape by a lot. So you then need to, I might even go for 2.5 actually. That increases the amount of polygons that you need to effectively support the shape. So as an example, if I go for, say, something really low, and then hit this Dynamesh button, in a sec. Then you can see that we get this sort of weird lumpiness because there's not that many faces to actually support the shape. So instead, we're going to go for something higher, 2.5. Okay, so once that's done, we can see here that our active points have increased to around 2.5 million, kind of off by a few 100,000 there, but yeah, now we have this really densely quantified mesh, and what we can do then is polish it. So go to Decimation and polish and make sure this circle at the end is solid. Then we can throw in a number. So for larger shapes with a lot of surface area, you don't need to hit it so hard with a polishing. So just for interest, if I hit it with say 60 polish, it'll take a while to do it, but yeah, that's really smooth. Kind of nice, but yeah, not what we're looking for. Sorry, it seems that level of polish kind of lagged out my PC there. OBS didn't like that, but yeah. Oh my god. So what we want to do is, let's just go for a lower polish value. Shut up, OBS. Oh, is it done? Yeah. Okay, it's not enough. Try 20. Lag, that's better. So yeah, once we get a polish level that we actually like, we then use Decimation Master. So this is Dynamesh, and this is Decimation Master. So Dynamesh quantifies the mesh and increases the poly count. Decimation effectively does the opposite. It reduces the poly count so that we have a more manageable mesh to deal with. So what we're going to do, we'll hit pre-process current. That then processes the mesh so that it's able to reduce it then later. If we make any changes to the mesh after we processed it, we'll have to process it again. Okay, so now it's processed. Not quite yet. Okay, now it's done. So yeah, we basically set a percentage for what we want our poly count to be reduced by. So if I go for 20 and then hit decimate, if I preview, decimate, then you'll see it reduces, it uses less polygons for flat surfaces because there's no detail there, it doesn't need to, and then focuses the polygons where it needs to be. What we can do is, because that's still quite a few, we want to aim for maybe 200,000-300,000. I can reduce it and just hit decimate again, and that just doesn't redo it all, doesn't reprocess it or anything. It just uses the same data that it had beforehand. Maybe a bit more than that. 6%, 100,000. So what we want to look out for here is any reduction in, because if we go too aggressive, say 2%, maybe even more, you start to get this sort of bumpiness. Yeah, you get this weird sort of specular response to the side. So if I just hit undo, seems about fine, and then we'll just hit export and just rename this to polished. That's exported. We'll go back to 3ds Max, and right, so we might want to do some more layer management here and have an unused bools folder, which we'll then put this in. Make sure we've got our layer set. Let's hide that. Then what we'll do is import our polished mesh, and then apply our high poly material to it, and then there you go, we have a polished mesh, nice and high poly. The only downside is, of course, we can't make any changes to, it's a bit odd, we can't make any, oh that's the bullet clipping through, we can't make any changes to this mesh, because obviously it's basically permanently like this now. There's no way we can edit this many vertices. So instead we have to basically get rid of it, go back to our Boolean, and then select in here and make the changes that we want to do. Then re-export it and then polish it in ZBrush and basically go redo the process. One other tip, what you can do if you want to make changes, I see people often make this mistake. If we hit remove and extract, then all of these shapes come out fine. But then if you try and remove this from the if you try and remove the original object from the ProBoolean, it won't let you do it. Instead you want to copy. So that copies it out. If we now hit delete, which deletes the ProBoolean, we now have the original shape editable and everything, which we can work with. So yeah, that just about covers it.